Good evening. I'm Dr. Alice Aiken, Vice President Research and Innovation at Dalhousie University. I would like to acknowledge that Dalhousie is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, and pay my respects to the elders. I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening's Open Dialogue Live, Changing Landscape. It's the third in a series of annual events, usually held in person, that celebrate women who are working in STEM and those who support and those who are considering entering these fields. Tonight's episode will feature 4 women professionals working in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM, to discuss the numerous ways 2020 has impacted their careers. They will discuss their struggles, accomplishments, and the significant role women play in the workplace and their continued underrepresentation in STEM-related fields. I'm happy to introduce our 4 amazing women in STEM, along with our interpreter, Karina Burris. Dr. Imogen Coe is a professor of chemistry and biology and former founding dean of the Faculty of Science at Ryerson University in Toronto. She's also an affiliate scientist at St. Michael's Hospital, Toronto, where her research group studies drug transporters. In addition to being an academic scientist, Dr. Coe is one of Canada's leading advocates for organizational change towards inclusive excellence in research, particularly in science and medicine. Faten Alshazly, BSCS 99, the founder and chief creative officer of WeUsThem, a full-service advertising agency. Faten has been named one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women. She is also named Executive of the Year and most recently Entrepreneur of the Year in Canada and internationally. Dr. Leslie Phillmore, a professor in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience and Associate Dean, Undergrad Programs Continuity in Dalhousie's Faculty of Science. Dr. Phillmore's research in the Songbird Neurology Lab studies song learning, song perception, and production, and the neural bases of these complex behaviors. Sarah Devereaux, BEng 93, MEng 99, is a graduate of the Technical University of Nova Scotia, now Dow. Sarah is a civil engineer at Dillon Consulting Limited, where she provides engineering solutions for a variety of projects throughout Nova Scotia and nationwide. Sarah has been recognized as one of Canada's most powerful women by the Women's Executive Network, and with many awards for her support of women in engineering. So welcome to the fabulous panel.
Thank you.
So to begin our discussion this evening, I'll ask a few questions and each of you will be able to weigh in. And then we will actually have time for questions from our viewers as well. So the first question, and I'm gonna start with Dr. Coe, with Imogen, and ask her, Imogen, in your opinion, how has COVID-19 impacted the careers of women in STEM?
Well, thank you very much for including me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm only sorry that I can't actually be with you in person at Dalhousie. It's always a great pleasure to visit. I don't have to express my opinion on how COVID has affected careers because we actually have data. We have a lot of studies now in Canada and beyond Canada that have shown us, that have provided us with evidence and data that demonstrate that COVID has impacted the careers and the activities and the participation of women in STEM-related professions in quite profound ways. And I think predominantly we've seen women taking on the burden of caregiving, whether that be small children or teenagers or elder care. We've seen women taking on the burden of homeschooling and having to step back from their activities, perhaps as academic researchers, as academic scientists, clinicians. I think predominantly heterosexual couples, we've seen that, but also single parents, same-sex couples. We're seeing women taking on those traditional gender stereotype roles, which COVID has kind of, imposed and brought to the forefront. So we know that it's having an impact. We know that it's having a negative impact, and we can actually measure it. So we have to start working on that after we've taken a look at the data.
Yeah, thanks, Imogen. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Faten, what about in your world? How are you finding the impacts?
Well, the COVID hasn't just impacted women in STEM. Actually, all career has suffered and got a hit from COVID. The only thing is, as some would say, based on what we see in the news and what we hear, is, and aside from the data, of course, which give us more concrete evidence, is because perhaps we're moving into a digital world and now we are investing heavily in vaccine research and such, that STEM hiring in general may have gone up. And it may have, as there's more demand on folks in digital science and technology and such. But the reality is there is still a lot more people there, as you were just explaining, that have been laid off, have been furloughed. In our business particularly, we have seen quite an increase, about 30% increase in job applications for junior developers that we're looking for. And the sad part is some of these applications come from seniors in the field, not actually juniors as we expect to see. And that's quite disheartening. That means there is a lot that looking for stability and looking for predictability in their future and making sure that they are stable. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Faten. I think I'll ask Sarah. I'll follow up with Sarah, somebody else working in the private sector. What's your take on this?
So for me, or historically, as I understand it, women struggle or have trouble being successful in STEM fields because they don't have the mentoring that some of our male colleagues access more easily. And with COVID, that just exacerbates that situation so much more, because you're not in the hallways or around the water cooler, if you will, or at lunch to start to build those mentoring relationships. And it has to be done in a very deliberate way if it's going to happen at all. And it makes it just that much more difficult to have that junior senior mentoring happen. And I think we're gonna see the complications of that for the years to come.
That's fascinating perspective. And Leslie, maybe a little bit with your psychology hat on, what do your take? What do you?
Well, from I have kind of two positions here, right? So one as a researcher and a mother with two kids who have been affected that way, but also being an associate dean, I'm seeing how widespread this effect is. And from the level of those that are teaching classes have to use any bandwidth they have that would go towards research to rejig their coursework. So that is taking up an extra amount of time. And what Sarah said about not being able to connect, we're seeing that everywhere. So students are less able to connect with each other. They're less able to connect with their mentors and professors. And then junior faculty are less able to connect with senior faculty everywhere. And because of that, those relationships aren't being developed, aren't being strengthened. And then just even finding advice, like, how do I cope with this situation? How do I mentor a student through this? That all of that lack of connection means that that aspect of career development is being lost. And the result of that is impact on mental health. And we're hearing that everywhere. So students are lonely. People are missing that human connection. It's not the same seeing you in 2D as it is in 3D, right? So that aspect of mental health and actually recognizing when someone is in a mental health distress or crisis, it might be a bit harder because you don't have that daily connection with them. So I'd say it's very widespread at many different levels.
Yeah, most certainly. And Faten, has the pandemic impacted you and your career?
It has, of course. It has. Over 80% of our businesses is actually outside of the region, so the rest of Canada or the United States. And we're required to be traveling quite a bit, or at least at the very least, we're required to have the capacity to travel quite a bit. That, of course, has been taken away from us. Case in point, we recently were the successful proponent of a large multi-year relationship with an organization in the Eastern United States. And we just lost this account due to the fact that we're not close, we're not able to travel as much. So that's some of the hits that we've taken. With that, however, on the optimistic side, we've been doing we're doing fairly well considering the circumstances. We haven't had to lay off anybody or furlough anybody so far. We've been holding tight, working together, taking care of the team and taking care of our clients. And I think we've been doing okay considering the circumstances.
Great. And Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, similar line. I mean, last year I was probably on a plane every other week. And of course, that doesn't happen at all in these days. And it does have pros and cons with that. The con is that I cannot, connect with my team in a direct way. I have to figure out other ways to collaborate and learn from one another. But on the positive side, I get to sleep in my own bed every night, which is great. The other piece that I find is that while I'm not traveling, neither are any of our other colleagues, so they're easier to access. So it's click on the video button and you have just about anybody in the firm. So that's the positive side. But to lean on my last comment is the sense of isolation was at least initially it was just almost unbearable, and having to figure out those new ways to connect has been what's gotten me through it anyway, for sure.
Yeah. And Leslie, what about you? From a research perspective and being a dean, has it impacted your career?
Well, good and bad, I would say. So maybe the bad first, I was supposed to be on sabbatical and go to all kinds of conferences, and that all, it got canceled. I mean, there was no conferences around. I thought my lab is closed down, so why take a sabbatical when I can't do new research? I had 2 undergraduate students who were supposed to do summer projects. So and I have, a senior graduate student who was trying to finish up his degree, and that progress got slowed down. And that's a huge responsibility as a PI, right? You want to make sure your students are okay, let alone yourself. I mean, we're way down the list, but our students are most important. So that was all of the negative things for me. The positive things were I started to figure out new ways of connecting with people. So our lab meetings are, as a group, we connect every week, and it's a check-in with how are you doing first, then what's the research. So we take a little bit more time to check in with each other and make sure as a lab group we're okay. We had a distance lab meeting with a lab in Alberta that we wouldn't necessarily have a lab meeting with, but it was really nice, kind of a more intimate setting, not at a conference. All of the students got to connect with each other. And then, to be honest, I wouldn't have this position of undergraduate programs continuity without COVID. I'm literally the queen of COVID in the Faculty of Science. They wouldn't let me call myself that, but I have this position specifically to help the faculty process all of the questions and changing courses to online and providing extra support and listening to what students have to say. So in that way, it's a positive for me. I wish it wasn't the reason I had a job, but there's good and bad, I'd say, for both sides.
Thanks. And Imogen, what about you? How are you finding it's impacted you in your career?
So I'm a little bit further along in on the pathway. For which I'm very fortunate. I'm also very much aware of my privilege, significant privilege, to have the security and the stability that I do in the profession that I have. So I practice intentional gratitude every day for that. And so I have a small lab, and it was based in a hospital, so everything shut down. And I could see the impact that was having on some of my my colleagues who are very worried about the productivity. I'm a lab bench cell biologist, so you need to be in the lab. You need to have access to your microscopes, to your cell culture facilities, and that is very, very challenging. But I'm very fortunate that I don't have to chase a grant deadline or publications. And a lot of the work I do these days is more around consulting, integrating principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility into science and medicine and health, and how do we go about doing that. So I also miss the travel. I was traveling a lot. I give a lot of talks. I'm engaged in a lot of activities around advising and advocacy, both in Ottawa and in other places. I am somebody who likes to read the room. I'm very conscious of that feel that when you're giving a talk, how's it going? What are people feeling? I read body language. So I found it very difficult to pivot that to online, because you can't read the body language. You can't necessarily see the people who are getting really uncomfortable with, with the sometimes I'm talking about racism, and I'm talking about, white privilege and that kind of thing. So there was a bit of a pivot there. I will say that also, I think we've all discovered that there are accessibility opportunities. So I discovered how to properly subtitle my slides. I discovered that you could connect with people who wouldn't necessarily be able to go to a conference because of financial reasons or because of travel reasons or whatever. So I think it's opened our eyes to barriers that previously perhaps we weren't paying attention to, which I hope will give us more opportunities in the future to create more truly inclusive design around all of our teaching, our activities, our research. So we do actually leverage more of the talent that we've been missing. So I can kind of see an opportunity here if we are intentional about pursuing it and resourcing it and making it a requirement, because I don't want to go back to we have an opportunity to come out of this better and more inclusive and more engaged and more accessible if we choose to do so.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Imogen. I think, COVID has forced the future upon us. So, let's take what's good from that. So let me just we'll move away from COVID. You can't not address it, but you're all very accomplished and successful professional women on this call. I'm just going to ask you, what do you think the biggest challenges facing young female professionals in STEM are? And maybe I'll start this one with Sarah.
Sure. For me, and engineering is my world. There is still tremendous stereotypes about what an engineer is, and what an engineer looks like, and what an engineer does. And I think that is a challenge for women, and paired with that is the unconscious bias that women don't want to do things that a typical start-out engineer would do, like the field work, like the travel, all of that. And I think those are the two things, like hand in hand, go with the struggles of getting women into engineering, and then once they are here, that they struggle with being successful.
Yeah. What and Leslie, what about from your perspective? What are the biggest challenges facing young female professionals in STEM?
I think it's learning what to say yes and what to say no to. That's one of the biggest things for me. And I'm not an assistant non-tenured professor anymore, but that was one of the very biggest things that I found the hardest is it's okay to say no to certain things. But you don't know that the impact of saying no to that isn't going to be as bad as you think it is. So, if I say no to this committee, is it going to reflect on when I go up for tenure? Is that going to be an issue? Or will my colleagues, look down on me and not being able to cope? So I think really learning that balance is incredibly important, and having the right mentor for that to help you through that is absolutely critical. So finding that mentor, and whether it's assigned to you by your institution, that might work, but I really would encourage women to find mentors. Like when you're in a meeting, look at who you think, I really like how they answered that question, or I really like how they conduct that class, and ask the question, put yourself forward and say, I admire the way you do this. Show me how you do it. Tell me what you think, so that you learn from different women in different aspects.
Great. And Imogen, I know you do mentor a lot of young women in STEM, and what do you think the biggest challenges facing them are?
Well, I hate this question. We always work from this deficit model that there's something wrong with women. And the biggest challenge, whether it be young women or whether it be people with disabilities or whether it be young gay men in tech, the problem is the culture and the context. It's toxic workplaces. It's invisible barriers. It's attitudes of gender stereotyping, attitudes of senior leaders who hold gender stereotyped or racist or sexist kinds of attitudes. It really is the culture and the context that says you don't belong here, or you don't look like, or you don't fit, or you don't, whatever it is. It's really, I think we need to flip that question and say, what is it about cultures and contexts of STEM that is limiting the full potential of women? And remember that women are not a homogeneous great monolith. There are women of color, there are queer women, there are women they're indigenous women. So there are all of those intersectionalities. So, and the richness of humanity, like what is it about the culture of STEM that says you don't fit here or you don't belong or whatever? So, and a lot of those things have been defined, and a lot of those things we can point to. And those are the things that I like to focus on and say, there is so much awesome talent out there. Let's start fixing the environment. I'm all for support and confidence building and mentoring, but none of that is going to work until we actually also really pay attention to the culture and context. And that means talking to men about gender stereotyping. It means talking to men about inclusive leadership. It means talking to men about how to be effective team players and partners and life partners. Talk about the impact of COVID on women because they're home taking care of the children. Well, that's a team game, right? But everybody should play that game equally. So I think we need to be really paying more attention to the culture.
Thanks, Imogen. And Faten, from your perspective, what do you think?
From my perspective, and I'm not just because I'm a creative person or work in a creative field, but we are visual human beings. And in the recent past, at least the past few years, and Alice, we were just in an event for women just recently. We need to be more visual and more visible about it. We're now seeing more women in the private sectors and events in the public sectors and such, and it's getting much better than the previous years. But we need to show this visibility to the young professional women that need to or want to impart this field. So when someone like Sarah, like myself, like everyone in the group today, do more of this, we're being watched. People are looking for role models. People looking at us and saying, I want to be like Sarah, or I want to be like Alice or such. And that's what we need right now. I recall back years ago when I was doing my undergraduate degree at Dal, and different than the stereotypical norm, teaching computer science. In my final year, I was taught by Dr. Waters, and she was a breath of fresh air. So seeing a female teaching computer science, she was the first, and until I graduated, she was the last, and I haven't met anybody. Refreshing style of teaching, a female, different perspective. And she has become then a great mentor, a role model, and eventually a friend. Because of her, the way I looked at computing science has drastically changed. I found somebody else I can relate to, someone else I can look at and say, I want to be like this, or here's someone else that has done it and I like the style and I like the way, and where she's taken that. We need to see more of this. And unfortunately, that hasn't changed much. Maybe a tiny bit, but not enough to entice and encourage young and female professionals to get in this field and know that they can find people looking like them and with different styles than what they've used to.
Yeah, great point. And I'm gonna sort of switch up the next question just a little bit. You knew I was going to do this anyways. So do we need more STEM classes in school? Like, how do is school for school-aged girls? Is that where this starts, or do we need more STEM classes? Is that where this starts, or is it attitudinal? I'm hearing about role models, mentorship, changing attitudes. Do you think it's a problem in school? I put up their hand because I just kind of lobbed that one out there.
So one of my favorite questions I ask young engineers is why? Young female engineers, why are you engineering? Why are you in engineering? Like, especially when we're in such small numbers, and often what I hear is my dad was an engineer, or my uncle, or somebody's friend, right? Like, that's often, like, especially people my age. It's a little bit better now, but then the second reason is my science teacher. My science teacher was so cool. That person made me love science. So if we can get that teacher that loves science and doesn't have that bias or that inherent stereotype that that everybody belongs in STEM fields, not just men, they can create that love of wonder and trying to solve problems and can create new STEM professionals. I don't think it's classes necessarily as the teacher or that kind of mentor, right? Like, that's a different kind of mentor, being a teacher that teaches this love of science and math.
Yeah.
Maybe I can follow up on that. I totally agree. If you ask someone why they go into a field, it's something like, I had this experience, and the experience could have been university. So for me, psychology was, I sat in my first psych class and I went, holy smokes, this has a bit of math, this has a bit of science, this is a bit of history. This is it for me. But I also had a grandfather who really liked animals and was interested in that kind of thing. So I knew an animal part of it was going to be really important. So if we can give young people that experience, it's not necessarily a class, it's a certain experience and a memory, then that might be what sparks them. You bring to light something they didn't realize. So when I do outreach to you, I've done outreach from all the way from primary to grade 9. When I go into a very young class, I mean, I don't talk about neurons or things like that. That's about grade 7, 8. I go in and say, what are the birds doing right now? Are they singing? Do they go to feeders? Now let's think about that. So this is an experience they kind of know about, but you bring it to the forefront and you say, I'm the one who studies this. I'm a scientist. And you can figure this kind of stuff out too. Why are the birds doing this? Why are the birds doing that? So it's not necessarily a class. It's giving them the chance to experience something, and it might just be one piece of outreach, one little activity that they remember. And that's what does it.
Imogen or Faten?
Absolutely agree. I mean, I was going to say, we do already have science classes, math classes, coding now in our school. So these do exist already. I think what we need is more experiential learning experiences. We need to make this more fun, more approachable, and possibly a passion to chase after for those fields. Recently, and maybe it's not the same, but just last year I had my little nephew, 5 years old, like visiting me last summer, and I took him to the Discovery Center. He's quite smart, and he's seeing the science labs and all the different experiments in front of him, and he left and he can't let go of it, and he want to go back to that. This is the kind of experience we try to create. We needed to stick with them and to chase it and build this passion. Once the passion is there, then we can add more classes and add more to our classes, but classes by themselves are not enough.
Good. Imogen?
I want to flip that question around as well, because, again, if you look at the data and the scholarship and the research in this field, it's not a question of sparking passion and interest. It's a question of stopping squelching it. And so we really need to be thinking about how we are sending the messages that say, actually, this isn't really for you, you don't quite fit in. And it's interesting when you talk about fathers, there's some really good data that say if you have a father, if you're a young woman, if you're a girl, and you have a father who does not hold a gender stereotyped view of the world, you're much more likely to go into a STEM-like pathway. So I work with an organization that does competitive robotics in high schools, and we have developed some programming around dads for daughters. It doesn't have to be your daughter, but dads for just girls in general to say, yeah, you know what, come and help me build this robot. And not doing the designing of the t-shirt for the team, but actually doing the coding, the hardware and the software. Because male authority figures, fathers, uncles, grandfathers, who really affirm an interest that already is there, are very impactful and very effective at being that sort of champion, cheering somebody on. We also have data from OECD, the PISA study, that says that if you ask 15-year-olds in Canada compared to other countries, girls and boys, what their aspirations are, the proportion of girls and boys who have aspiration to STEM pathways is about the same. It's like 35 or 45% or something, and it's one of the highest levels in the OECD. So we have a real capacity there of keen, interested, aspirational young people and young women who have the passion, have the interest, and somehow, media and marketing, television, TV shows, parental attitudes, teachers for sure, are very subtly and insidiously kind of squelching that and saying, don't think so. I'm not sure math, maybe go into commerce or business, I'm not sure physics, maybe go into, something else. And I have a ton of stories. I get stories every time I give a talk from across the country. Every time I give a talk on equity and STEM, somebody tells me their story. I left this discipline because it was toxic, or I left that because I was told, yes, you're good at this, but you'll never be an engineer, or something, you're good at math, but you'll never be an engineer. So I think kids are awesome. Like little kids, girls and boys, they're just awesome, and they're full of passion and curiosity. They're just like natural scientists. Like they're all born creative and natural and asking questions. We just got to get out of their way and stop limiting them, boys and girls. Like, don't gender stereotype kids. Look at the clothes, look at the toys, look at the books, look at the movies, and just stop it. Just stop it. Get out of their way and stop gender stereotyping kids.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So, I'll start with Leslie on this one. What opportunities do you think exist, either locally, nationally, or internationally in STEM?
Well, I could speak sort of locally. And I will say, Imogen, I do agree with you. So here's an example. I got invited to this conference in Scotland, and the field that I work in is a fairly young field, but it is dominated by a group of people that always get invited to the conferences, right? And the sort of grandfather researchers of all them are all men. So to be invited to this conference was a huge thing, because I thought, oh my gosh, someone knows who I am compared, aside from this core group who always give the talk. So it is about breaking down that barrier. How did that happen? I don't know. Did I just keep going to the conferences? Did I just keep trying to publish a paper? Did I just keep trying to make myself heard? I mean, this is sort of not answering your question, Alice, but I think, the breaking down the context is one thing, but at the same time, I think we have to keep developing resilience in our researchers so that they will push against that wall and not give up. So I don't know. Maybe it's right. It's both sides, right? So I think opportunity wise, I would encourage women to look for opportunities as, say, undergraduates. So apply for those research awards. Even if you don't think you'll get it, apply for it, because you never know if you will. So there are summer research awards for younger students to get paid to do research over summer. So that's one thing. talk to the professors in your classes and ask for opportunities to work in their labs. If you're not here if you're not at your home university in the summer, look at going to a professor at a different university where you are. So across Canada, look for that opportunity. And the other thing I would say, so one thing that I tried to do was, if I was traveling somewhere when I was sort of younger and trying to build my CV, I would ask to give a talk somewhere. And I would say, you know what, I'm coming to visit family here. Maybe I would know a name at a university, and I would say, can I come and give a talk? And if they say no, they say no, but it might be an opportunity. So, I mean, I think other of you on the panel might have better advice on that or about opportunities, but I think sometimes you have to make them for yourself.
Oh, that's great. Faten, what's your perception on that?
There's lots of opportunities. Things are quite different in a good way recently. Locally, we've been, when I mean locally, I mean provincially, been doing a lot to offer opportunities for new grads in the STEM fields. We've been the government provincially and federally been providing funding for ideas and entrepreneurships. Employers have been provided assistance to hire new talents and young talents in the STEM fields as well. So it's much easier than it was before. And in fact, there is a lack of talent now provincially. So I would think of us like years ago when we graduated, and the first thing is that the hardest thing, and then I think also in engineering, that there isn't enough jobs in the province or in the city, and we end up traveling or going elsewhere to live elsewhere to look for jobs. Now they're staying, we're retaining the talents more because there's more hires or more opportunities to hire them. There is more incentive for employers to hire and invest in young talents. So locally, that's great, and the investment coming from the federal government as well. Internationally, everywhere we go, things are different. We just came not just came back in February, but that was an account with the Caribbean, building one of 3 in the world digital currencies with the World Bank, and piloting this in 4 countries. And even though we were tasked to do the marketing strategy and the campaigning around it, such in the 4 countries, our vendor sister that was working with us, they are the ones that doing the tech part of it. And it was fascinating to see where the team is coming from. Some of them from Toronto, some of them from the States, some of them from the Caribbean. These are brilliant opportunities, and all of them were from the young, fresh grads to the mid-careers to the senior career levels. So things has changed, and it became borderless, if I can say.
That's great. Sarah, what are your thoughts on that? What opportunities exist? Just because Faten mentioned engineering in there.
Right. So, I mean, in consulting engineering has proven to be pretty resilient through this COVID situation we're living in. We've maintained our staffing, and in fact, are hiring right now in the country. It continues to grow, and there's tons of opportunity. But I will caveat that by, consulting goes with the economy. So if the economy slows down in the year to come because the municipalities don't have their coffers filled because of lack of getting money in, then that may change. But right now, everything is pretty rosy, and we're doing very well for this year, for sure, for us, and as I understand the industry as a whole. So internationally, I don't have as much knowledge, but definitely in Canada and the consulting engineering, we're doing well.
Fabulous. Well, that's sort of why I saved Imogen till last. I know Imogen has a good bead on this opportunities nationally and internationally in STEM. Imogen, where are you seeing the trends go?
Oh, I think there's huge opportunities when, we have to transition to much more of a knowledge-based economy. We are facing increased demand for things like cybersecurity, data analytics. We can't keep up with the demand for data analytics and data science kinds of graduates. I think we are going to see a big push, maybe short-lived, but I don't know, in biotech. I know that I was talking to somebody from UBC recently, and there are some big companies who just are sucking up basically all of the graduates coming out of life sciences and pharmacology and pharmacy from UBC because of the the global demand that is going to be in place for vaccines and the next vaccine and the issues that are going to come out of COVID in terms of long-term health implications and that kind of thing. So I think STEM careers always have been and will continue to be in demand, secure, generally well-paying, keeping in mind the limitations sometimes of moving up in those pathways, which is something that we need to work on. So I think there are tremendous opportunities. I agree with Leslie. We need to build resilience. We need to equip particularly young women and people from marginalized groups with skill sets and core competencies around resilience, how to navigate through potentially difficult kinds of contexts. And at the same time, we need to really work on those contexts to say, wow, there's a ton of human talent out there. There's brilliant people, brilliant young people with great ideas. You need to make sure that you're recruiting them because you're going to, Canada does produce very good quality science and science and medicine and engineering trained people. So tons of opportunities, and it's our job to really, make sure that we move people into those career pathways.
Well, Imogen, I'll sort of ask you to continue that thought and ask my last question before we open it to the audience, and we'll open it right after that. But what do you think the future looks like, particularly for women in STEM?
Wow, that's like a 3-day workshop. I think, I'm a pragmatic optimist or an optimistic pragmatist. I think there's huge potential. I think we must absolutely have women engaged. We must have women at the table. We must have women involved in building back, stronger, better, more resilient economies. We need to have women's voices heard and their ideas and their perspectives. So I think the future looks good if we are willing to kind of go ahead and grasp it with both hands. And that means not just us, that means everybody. That means men and people in power with power and privilege and people who are decision makers and policy makers. So I'm positive, but I'm also going to hold the people with power accountable for doing the right thing because that's their job.
Perfect. And I am gonna ask each of our panelists. I just would like to say to the audience, if you have any questions, please start typing them in. We'd like to hear from you as well. Faten, I'm going to go to you next. So what do you think the future looks like for women in STEM?
I think the future is ever so bright for women in STEM. That's what I think. My only concern is for the future lies in ensuring that we do not let up. We need to continue doing what we're doing right now. We need to continue doing, making sure that there is more advocacy, mentorship, we're visible, offering opportunities. My only fear is this dies down and it doesn't continue. And if it does, then we'll go back to where we were.
Yeah, fantastic. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I have the same positive outlook as everybody, and yeah, I mean, it's why, I do what I've done in terms of supporting women in engineering is, I love our profession and I want it to be open and available to everyone, and I don't, just talk to women. It's everybody, and like Imogen said, like we need the men to be saying these kind of things too, right? It needs to be everybody. And once we do that and we get the culture to shift, even a bit, I think we can have tremendous impact.
Thanks. And Leslie, what about you?
Me for last. I have hope. I have a lot of hope. I feel like from the time I started my career as a scientist to now, there has been a noticeable change. I no longer feel like I have to put up with certain behaviors from men, for example, but maybe that's because I'm older and I'm not so vulnerable. So transferring that protection that I have now to someone who is vulnerable, I think is a big responsibility that we need to share. So that protective space, like Imogen says, is part of breaking down that context that happens now. I also think that the pandemic has created a lot of opportunities that might not otherwise have been there. So in some ways it has evened the field. So it's evened the field in some ways, and it also has created opportunities that might not have been there. What am I talking about? So here's an example. When we had to pivot to shutting down all the labs, we had a bunch of students who needed to do research projects, and they all couldn't do the research projects that happened in the lab because the labs were closed. And so what that did was it forced researchers to look at what other ways they could train students and what other skills would they be able to get out of a research experience besides learning how to pipette, learning how to manipulate this particular piece of equipment in the lab. Instead, it moved to much more transferable skills and general skills like data management, data analysis, communication skills. So being able to communicate in a 2D world is even more important than it maybe was before. So I think what this has done is kind of broadened the set of skills that students and women can learn from an experience in science that are much more applicable more broadly across many different careers. So I think in that way, the opportunities have gotten bigger.
Excellent. Thanks, Leslie. So we're going to go to a question from a viewer now. From Sarah Stewart Clark. So as women in STEM, we know the barriers we are experiencing, but until men start taking in these sessions to learn, how do we change the system? System change is critical for women in STEM. Imogen?
Well, yes. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time, and writing about it and speaking about it and calling out manuals and taking a lot of abuse. I think we have to incentivize. We have to say, you know what, if you're going to be appointed to a position of leadership, you need to have some core competencies around building an inclusive team. Do you know how to do that? Do you know what EDI principles are? Do you know how to apply them? How to integrate them into what you're doing? So we have to incentivize the behaviors that we seek. And that means we have to expect them to have the skill sets. And we have to recognize and reward the people that do that kind of thing well. And so I think the Tri-Councils, in terms of research funding, have done quite a good job in terms of incentivizing, incentivizing the evidence of some awareness of equity issues when you submit a grant to NSERC or when you want a CRC for your institution. I've been very impressed in Ontario by some of the big engineering companies, many of them led by older, white, straight, middle-class men who tend to be the dominant demographic, who have recognized that they are missing a skill set. So they've gone away and got themselves trained through Catalyst, through organizations that actually upskill men to have an awareness and to educate them around these issues. And in the corporate world, they're doing that because they recognize they want to retain talent. They want to attract talent. They want to retain talent, and they want to develop talent. I would say the academic world's a bit slow and has a lot of catching up to do, but there's quite a lot of data from behavioral psychology and behavioral economics in terms of how can you get people to sort of do what it is you need to do, learn what it is that they need to do, and set expectations. So we need to say it out loud. That's one thing that is very uncomfortable in Canada, is to say, and this is what I do, it's my job, I have tenure, so I'm safe, is to say it's time for men to step up, get involved, take responsibility, be accountable, and kind of get with the program. And it's good for everybody. And I can show you the data as to why gender equity is good for everybody if you don't believe me. But, you can trust me as an expert. So we have to say it out loud. And, men need to be stepping up and taking care of families. That's why COVID is hitting women so hard, because, I don't get that. So we need men to speak to it as well. So there are some great male champions out there. We need more of them.
Great. Maybe what I'll do is go to Leslie next from the academic perspective, and then we'll go to Faten and Sarah for the private sector perspective on that.
I think including men in these kinds of discussions is huge, right? So it's good to talk about it, but then you need to action it. And that's something that happens everywhere. So you talk about it and then you think, oh, wouldn't that be good? And then nothing comes of it. So the next step is to do action items, like include men in these discussions, and give examples of how this has directly affected you on a personal level. And I think that's a way to connect them with that experience for you. And that I mean, you can think in a big way. I tend to think in a much smaller way, one man at a time, maybe, and when I talk to my kids, I talk to them in certain ways about and use certain language that's not exclusionary, just so that becomes normative for them, so that they know that it, if I hear anything that comes home from school that I don't agree with or how they present it, that gets shut down immediately, and we have a discussion about it. So and my kids are boys, so including men in that discussion, I think is going to be key.
That's great. Now we are having more questions popping up. So maybe what I'll do is we'll go to the next question, and we'll start with Faten or Sarah for that one. So we get, okay, from Nancy Hayter, what is the one thing we could change in the system to better support women in STEM? Sarah, would you like to start with that one?
One thing. I think probably an acknowledgement that we are all biased, and it's not conscious, and it's not done. It's not, everybody has it, you, me, everyone. And if we can acknowledge that and realize that, women are as good as men in doing these STEM roles, and getting everybody to acknowledge that conscious bias, us women, men, all genders, all ethnicities, everybody, I think would be the one thing, if you're going to make me do one.
Faten, do you have a perspective on that?
I mean, it's pretty much the same as everybody else is sharing. The first part is inclusion from men. They need to be around the table with us in all that. But I just saw one of the comments: pay more, or pay them more, or equal pay. That's a no-brainer, and the discussions have been going on for a long time on that. But we need to recognize where the gaps are, and we need to have men around the table. In the private sector, and I'll just speak about at least our agency, we've been intentionally, and I'm not going to say myself, I'll say my business partner, who's a man, so he knows that we need this diversity, the gender diversity, every diversity that we can bring, because we need this diversity in thoughts and perspective around the table. It only strengthens us. And the more we pay attention to that and bring them on, is the more it becomes normal. We're starting to normalize this. So the expectation is we have more female, more different backgrounds, more everything. Like, we just need to be a diverse group around the table. And if we get the buy-in from the executive team, I think that's how you can bring that more and just source all these problems.
Thank you so much. We'll go to another question, and that'll probably have to be our last one. From Julie, what is Dal doing to encourage women STEM faculty members, especially to recruit new faculty members? So I'm going to ask Leslie to start with that.
I was going to say, Alice, this is for you, isn't it?
It is a little bit, I suppose, yeah. But why don't you speak from your perspective first?
Well, we just hired a couple of people in psychology, and all of the candidates were women, but I think that's field-based. So the field of psychology tends to go towards, to be biased towards women scientists, I think, being in it. So I think we are trying to promote positions that that will support women. So it's not necessarily getting women to apply for the job, but it's showing them when they get to the interview how we can support them as a woman researcher here. So it's very department based, because you visit with the department, but even if they meet with the dean of that faculty, that part should be there. So from all levels, that support should be there so it's not just advertising, it's at the interview, make sure that's part of it.
Yeah, and Dal does have a policy that
Yeah.
Unless a non-diverse candidate is substantially better, the position goes to the diversity candidate. Though I would often argue that the diversity candidate is substantially better. But we do really encourage women hiring. And Faten, you would be very pleased to come back to the Faculty of Computer Science now and see how many women professors we have and how many women students we have. 32% of our first year class last year was women. Wow. So yeah, really try to encourage it. We do have a question from a science teacher. So Sabrina, a science teacher, Sabrina Matager. I work with many teenage girls in their last year of high school. Favorite subjects equal math and science. Strong work ethic, incredible focus. They all want to be doctors. I know that medicine is a glamorized profession. They all know Grey's Anatomy. Do you have a suggestion as to how I can make other STEM careers come alive? Hard to compete with Grey's Anatomy. Most have no clue what other options are open to them.
Exposure.
True, exposure, yeah. Imogen, do you want to take that and we'll wrap up, and thank you.
That's very, very common, very, very common. And it breaks my heart when I see young women, especially with great skills and work ethic in math, because we need those really, we need those talented mathematicians and the life sciences. I think the one thing that can be very effective is the near peer effect. It's much more impactful to have somebody who is closer to you in age. So one of the things that we've tried to do and other places have done is connect undergraduates who are maybe doing research projects in biomedical sciences or are working with medical physicists around and biomedical engineers around sort of health allied or health related kinds of projects, but which are really exciting and really novel and are very directly patient oriented quite quickly. So I think it's exposure to those other options, but in a very personal, relatable way. So they need to see somebody who is maybe 3, 4, 5 years older than them, maybe looks like them. This is why representation is so important. And connect with them, and then and keep the connections going if you can. So there's some good organizations that are really trying to do more of that, but we don't do a good enough job around showing what you can do rather than be on Grey's Anatomy. There's so much more out there. So.
Yeah, that's a great follow-up, and I know everyone has more to say, and unfortunately our time has come to an end. Listen, Sarah, Leslie, Faten, Imogen, I can't thank you enough for your time and your expertise, for first of all being brilliant women in STEM, but also for really taking the time to think about and care about mentorship and the future of women in STEM. I think everybody on the phone tonight is going to go away feeling, or on the, oh my God, I'm old, on the video, away feeling really inspired by each and every one of you. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And that's all we can do this evening. So stay well, everybody. And please, if you have any more comments, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll see them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.